Welcome in, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this custom-tailored deep dive. We are really thrilled you're here with us today.
Absolutely. It's great to be here.
And before we get into anything else, we actually have a very special announcement to make.
Who you?
Yeah, this particular deep dive is actually presented by Christ the Savior in Tagaytay City, Philippines.
Which is fantastic.
It really is. It's been crafted specifically for you, the people of the Philippines. We're looking at this as a shared journey of discovery.
Yeah, and we really want to honor the incredible dedication of the presenting community over in Tagaytay City. Knowledge knows no borders, right?
Exactly.
And the concepts we're going to explore today are, well, they're as universal as the human experience itself. It's just an absolute honor to be walking through this material with you.
Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're looking at a really fascinating piece of source material. It's a transcript from a YouTube channel called Harmony, and the video is titled How the Early Christians Fought Demons.
Right, which sounds intense.
It does. I know what you're thinking. You hear a title like that, and you immediately picture, I don't know, an ancient action movie.
Or a spooky horror film.
Right, with exorcisms, spinning heads, supernatural battles, all of that. But here is the secret. That is not what this text is about at all.
Not even close.
No, it's actually this profound 2,000-year-old psychological and spiritual manual, and it comes straight from the ascetic fathers and mothers of Orthodox Christianity.
What's fascinating here is that we are completely reframing that loaded, often scary word, demons.
Yeah.
The mission today isn't about telling spooky ghost stories around a campfire. It's about identifying the invisible forces, what the source text refers to as principalities and powers.
And the rulers of the darkness of this age, I think it says.
Exactly. When you strip away that ancient vernacular, what they're really talking about are the hidden psychological forces and the deeply ingrained impulses that literally dictate our modern behaviors.
It's psychology before psychology existed.
Yes. These ancient saints viewed our daily struggles not as simple moral failings or, as some inherent badness within us. They viewed them as actual sicknesses.
And like any sickness, it requires a cure.
A very specific, highly targeted, and holistic cure.
I think that reframing is going to be a massive paradigm shift for a lot of people listening because we are so used to the idea of bad habits or character flaws.
Right.
But looking at them as a sickness changes the entire approach. In the text, they contrast these sicknesses, which they call the passions, against modern society.
Which is a really interesting contrast.
It is. But let's clarify that word too. Because when I hear the word passion today, I usually think of it as a massive compliment.
Like a passion for painting?
Yeah, or passionate marriage. It's seen as the spice of life. But in this 2,000-year-old context, they mean something entirely different, don't they?
They absolutely do. In the ascetic framework, a passion is not a romantic feeling. It's not a healthy enthusiasm. It is defined as a sin that has developed such an intense impulse in your life that it completely controls you.
Wow.
It becomes an obsessive drive that impacts your relationship with yourself, your relationships with others, and your relationship with God.
So it's destructive.
Highly destructive. If we connect this to the bigger picture, we really have to look at their radical view of the word sin itself. In our modern context, sin is viewed almost purely as a legalistic infraction.
Like breaking a rule.
Exactly. You broke a rule, you crossed a red line, you failed to fulfill a moral code, and now you have a black mark on your record.
Mm-hmm.
But the ascetic fathers and mothers didn't see it as a courtroom violation. They saw it as an ontological disease.
A disease of our actual being.
Yes.
That makes it feel less about a judge banging a gavel and more about a doctor diagnosing a tumor.
Precisely the right analogy. A sin is a sickness. It's a behavior that incorrectly utilizes and perverts human faculties that were originally created for the good. The text explicitly states that an act of sin is contrary to nature.
Contrary to nature, I want to pause on that, because it means we aren't fundamentally built to operate this way. Our original design, our true nature, is inherently good, but these sicknesses warp it.
They take a natural appetite and completely distort it.
And the text outlines this incredible step-by-step evolution of how this disease progresses. It doesn't just happen overnight. You don't wake up one day suddenly possessed by a destructive passion.
No, it's a highly specific, observable sequence.
Right. It goes suggestions, then thoughts, then actions, then habits, and finally, impulse behaviors that completely warp reality.
The granularity of that progression is is where the psychological genius of these early Christians really shines. They were observing the human mind with the precision of modern neuroscientists.
Just using a different vocabulary.
Exactly.
Let's try to ground that progression for the listener with an everyday analogy. Let's look at how a simple passing suggestion transforms into a reality warping impulse. Let's say you're working at your desk on a Tuesday afternoon. You're focused on a spreadsheet. Suddenly, a completely unprompted image of a sugary, frosted donut pops into your head.
Happens to the best of us.
Right. That's the suggestion stage. It's just a whisper. It's an image flashing on the screen of your mind. You didn't ask for it.
And at that exact moment, you have a crucial choice. The ascetic fathers would say the suggestion itself is not a sin. It's not the sickness.
Because you didn't choose it.
Right. The sickness hasn't taken root just because an image appeared. But if you entertain it, if you pull up a chair for that image and start engaging with it, it transitions into a thought.
Right. So now you're thinking about the donut. You're wondering what bakery is open nearby in Tagaytay. You're imagining the glaze, the texture, how good it would taste with a cup of coffee.
You're actively participating in the narrative now.
Yes. And that thought builds localized pressure, which leads to an action. You actually get up, you leave your desk, you walk to your car, and you buy the donut. Now, doing that once is an action. But if you do this every single afternoon at 2:00 p.m., it solidifies into a habit.
And this is where the neural pathways start to get paved over and hardened. The more you repeat the action, the less conscious thought is required.
Which brings us to the final stage, impulse. Once it's a habit, it sinks its roots in so deep that suddenly you aren't even consciously deciding to buy the donut anymore.
You're just on autopilot.
You just blink and your car has magically turned into the bakery parking lot. Your reality is entirely warped because your brain is telling you, I literally cannot survive the rest of this workday without this sugar.
You feel an existential panic if you can't get it.
Yes, you have become a servant to the impulse.
That analogy perfectly illustrates what the text means by perversions that are self-gratifying, self-pleasing, and self-loving. The donut is a mild example, but scale that up to darker destructive behaviors.
Like rage or financial hoarding.
Destructive physical addictions.
Yeah.
Ultimately, these impulses destroy the natural selflessness and self-emptying love that man was created for. You lose your unity with yourself because your appetites are controlling your intellect.
You're divided.
Very divided. You lose unity with your neighbor because you view them either as an obstacle to your passion or a tool to fulfill it.
Yeah.
And you lose unity with God because you're entirely consumed by the feeding of the self.
And this brings us to a massive culture clash. The source contrasts this ancient ascetic worldview with what it calls our advanced society.
Right.
Modern society defines a meaningful existence almost entirely by self-gratification. The overt goal of modern consumerism is to feed the passions.
That's the business model.
It is. The societal mandate we're bombarded with from birth is essentially get in as much pleasure as you possibly can, experience every sensation before death comes to your door.
We live in an attention economy that has monetized the very passions these monks were fleeing to the desert to escape. Every algorithm, every billboard, every targeted ad is designed to introduce a suggestion, foster a thought, prompt an action, and lock you into a habitual impulse.
The irony presented in the text is staggering when you think about it that way. We're told by modern marketing and culture that leaning into our desires is the ultimate freedom.
Do what makes you happy.
Speak your truth. Treat yourself. We have an evolved world saturated with every pleasure imaginable right at our fingertips. Yet the text points out that despite having all this so-called freedom, we are more anxious, depressed, and enslaved than ever.
It's a paradox.
The passions are marketed to us as liberation, but they're actually chains. The source text beautifully and somewhat tragically describes this as a dark prison that the world has built around us.
It is a profound realization. We think we're free because we have infinite choices of entertainment, infinite choices of food, infinite ways to make ourselves comfortable. But time and time again, indulging those infinite choices proves to be the very mechanism of our enslavement.
We're choosing our own chains.
Exactly. The ascetic fathers recognized that to truly be free, to die to this world's death-dealing ideology, we must turn completely against it. We have to root out the remnants of this worldview that have taken up residence in our own minds.
So how do we actually do that? How do we break out of a prison we can't even see most of the time? That brings us to the diagnostic test.
The crucial first step.
Right. If you want to cure a sickness, the very first step is identifying it. You can't treat an illness if you don't know what specific virus is attacking your system. The fight has to begin with what the source calls a true examination of ourselves, recognizing that we are actually sick with these passions.
We have to drop the ego.
Drop the ego and admit that we are possessed by them and desperately need healing.
This raises an important question.
Huh.
How often should we be doing this examination?
Yeah, is this a yearly thing?
The source is adamant that this isn't a one-time spiritual retreat activity. It isn't a New Year's resolution. This requires daily examination.
Daily.
Daily. Because these passions were incredibly elusive. They hide in what the text calls the inner depths of the heart. They camouflage themselves.
They don't want to be found.
A destructive passion of anger will disguise itself as righteous indignation. A passion of gluttony will disguise itself as self-care. We have to peer into ourselves and look beneath the surface of the heart every single day to catch these things before the roots crack the foundation.
To help us do that, the source gives us a brilliant diagnostic toolkit. I want you, the listener, to really think about these next 5 questions. Pick an area of your life where you feel stuck, or a habit you suspect might be controlling you, and apply these.
This is where it gets real.
It does. These are the 5 crucial questions from the text to determine if a passion has taken hold of you. Number 1, do you lie or deceive yourself or others to cover up the passion or sin?
Powerful.
Number 2, do you feel irritated or restless if the passion cannot be fulfilled? Number 3, are you thinking about this passion throughout the day? Number 4, do you feel uneasy and shameful when you engage in it? And number 5, is this thing a rooted pattern that you can't or simply don't want to change?
If we really analyze those 5 questions, we can see the absolute psychological brilliance of the early ascetics. Notice what they don't ask.
Great.
They don't ask, are you a bad person? Our ego would immediately say no. They don't ask, do you have a problem? We would rationalize it away. Instead, they target the clinical symptoms of enslavement. Let's look at that first one, lying and deceiving.
Okay.
If you find yourself hiding the online shopping boxes before your spouse gets home or minimizing how many drinks you had, the deception itself is the diagnostic marker of a passion.
The second question about irritation is the one that really gets me. Do you feel irritated or restless if it can't be fulfilled? Let's apply that to modern life. If you want to know if you are enslaved to a comfort, say, your morning cup of coffee or checking your social media feeds, observe your physical and emotional reaction when you are abruptly deprived of it.
That's the real test.
The Wi-Fi goes down or the coffee maker breaks. If you feel a disproportionate surge of anger, irritation, or an anxious restlessness that ruins your morning, that is the symptom of a passion. The substance or the habit is pulling your strings.
The symptom is the proof of the invisible chain. And the third question, thinking about it all day, shows how the passion colonizes your mental real estate. If you're sitting in a meeting but your brain is planning your next drink, your next purchase, or your next meal, you are not a free individual in that moment.
And then there's the shame factor in question 4, feeling uneasy when engaging in it. We often try to numb that shame by leaning harder into the behavior, which just feeds the cycle.
A vicious cycle.
So, assuming a listener is nodding along right now, realizing they have several of these invisible chains, where do they start? I love the tactical advice the text provides here. It tells us not to go in guns blazing, trying to fix every single flaw in our character all at once.
It never works.
The strategy of war here is to identify the chief sin. You find the biggest, most damaging passion in your life, the one that triggers the most yes answers to those 5 questions, and you wage war against that one passion first.
The wisdom there is immense, and it aligns with modern psychological triage. If you try to overhaul your entire human nature overnight, wake up at 4 a.m., eat only vegetables, never get angry, and give away all your money, you'll suffer immediate burnout.
You'll quit by Tuesday.
Exactly. The fathers understood human limitation. By focusing your spiritual energies on the primary stronghold of the enemy in your life, you establish a beachhead. Often, the other lesser passions are actually just coping mechanisms feeding off the main one.
That makes so much sense.
Once the chief passion is weakened, the lesser ones lose their structural support and become much easier to dismantle.
That sets up a huge transition for us. We've diagnosed the sickness, we understand how the virus operates, now we need the medicine. The text introduces us to a regimented way of life known as asceticism.
Yes.
Now, I have to be honest. When I hear the word asceticism, I just picture a guy with a long beard living in a cave, eating bugs, and whipping himself. Is that what we're talking about here? Because that feels a little inaccessible for someone commuting to work in Tagaytay City.
It's a very common misconception.
Hmm.
In modern language, the word asceticism carries a heavy, negative connotation. It conjures images of extreme, miserable deprivation or a hatred of the physical body.
Right.
But defined properly by these ancient texts, asceticism is simply the act of self denial aimed at gaining control over the passions. The Greek root of the word ascetasis simply means training or exercise. It was the word used for athletes preparing for the Olympics.
So it's like a spiritual workout plan.
Exactly. It is a therapeutic regimen. Think of physical therapy. If you shatter your knee, the physical therapy regimen is going to be painful. You're going to have to stretch muscles that haven't been stretched and endure a lot of discomfort.
But the pain isn't the point.
Right. The goal isn't the pain. The goal is restoring mobility to the broken limb. Spiritual asceticism works the same way. It uses natural virtues, fasting, prayer, giving to the poor, to correct the soul in a holistic way. It's about restoring balance and putting the intellect back in charge of the appetites.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We always hear that phrase, actions speak louder than words. We tend to focus all our moral energy on our external behavior, but the source points out that all of this starts much, much earlier than the action. The text calls the mind a battlefield, and it describes our thoughts as the primary artillery.
It's a striking image.
Think about how radically different that is from our modern society. Today, society trains us to accept almost every thought that whizzes through our brains. We validate them. We even define our core identity by our thoughts. We say things like, I think this, therefore, this is who I am.
It is perhaps the most profound vulnerability in the modern psyche. In no other time in human history have unbridled random thoughts been given such prestige and importance. We assume that simply because a thought originates in our own head, it must be true, it must be authentic, or at least it must be worthy of our attention.
But the ascetics didn't buy that.
The ascetics completely rejected this premise. They understood that the mind is porous and not every thought is healthy or even originates from our true selves. In fact, if you want to conquer the physical actions that harm your soul, it's truly impossible unless you actively watch over those deceitful thoughts before they ever reach the action stage.
And that introduces us to the core practice of watchfulness. The text gives us this incredible quote from a relatively modern ascetic, St. Joseph the Cave Dweller. He says, watchfulness is unceasing attentiveness, alertness, or vigilance, whereby one keeps watch over one's inward thoughts and fantasies so that they don't enter the heart.
It's constant guard duty.
I just picture a guard standing at the gate of a heavily fortified castle, holding a lantern, inspecting every single wagon that tries to roll across the drawbridge.
That visualization captures it perfectly.
Oh.
You are not your thoughts, you are the guard evaluating the thoughts. And when you identify a thought that provokes a passion or ignites a craving for a spiritually destructive behavior, the text says it must be treated with absolute contempt and immediately driven out of the mind.
No negotiating.
You don't negotiate with it. You don't say, well, let me just think about this for 5 minutes and see where it goes. You don't entertain it at all. You evict it.
But how do we actually do that in practice? I mean, trying not to think about something is notoriously difficult. If I tell you not to think of a pink elephant, you immediately think of a pink elephant.
Right.
When a thought is stubborn and intrusive, how do we drive it out? The text prescribes some very specific remedies. The first is simply ignoring the thought, which, as we just established, is easier said than done. But the idea is to deprive the thought of the oxygen of your attention.
Yes.
The second remedy is acting in a virtue contrary to the thought. If you have a thought of deep, venomous selfishness, you immediately force yourself to go do an act of extreme generosity. You break the mental pattern with a physical contradiction.
Both of those are powerful. But the third remedy, which is heavily emphasized in Orthodox asceticism, is the Jesus prayer. It's a short, rhythmic, repetitive prayer. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner.
It seems so simple. How does a one-sentence prayer fight off an entire psychological sickness?
The utility of a short, repetitive prayer like the Jesus prayer cannot be overstated, even from a purely modern psychological standpoint. When you are addicted to a certain passion, the thoughts can ignite such a fierce fire in your mind that it feels impossible to quench. The dopamine loop is spinning out of control.
You're trapped in it.
You are actively enslaved in that cognitive moment. Repeating a single focusing phrase acts as a pattern interrupt. In modern cognitive behavioral therapy, they use similar grounding techniques to stop a panic attack or an obsessive thought spiral.
That's a great parallel.
The Jesus prayer acts as a spiritual anchor. It tethers your intellect back to reality and, more importantly, back to God, breaking the hypnotic spell of the temptation.
It's an active weapon against the artillery of the mind, your returning fire. Now, the text also offers a very practical tip here. While these remedies have been tested through time by the ascetics, you don't have to figure it all out on your own.
In fact, you shouldn't.
Right. Trying to be your own spiritual doctor is usually a bad idea. There is immense value in finding an experienced spiritual guide, a priest, or a wise layperson, which the text notes can be found in the Orthodox Church. Someone who actually knows the terrain of this mental battlefield can help you navigate your specific enslavements.
Having a guide ensures you don't fall into the trap of delusion. Because the human mind is infinitely deceitful, we can easily trick ourselves into thinking we're making massive spiritual progress, when in reality we're actually just shifting from one passion to another.
Like swapping addiction.
Exactly. We might conquer gluttony, only to immediately become intensely proud of our fasting. A guide provides objective oversight and course correction.
All right, with the battlefield of the mind defined and the rules of engagement set, let's get into the specifics. The source breaks down the passions into three main categories: physical, emotional, and spiritual.
This is where it gets very detailed.
I want to spend significant time on each of these because this is where the rubber meets the road. Let's start with the physical passions and the absolute root of them all: gluttony. Now, when I hear gluttony, my mind immediately goes to someone eating way too much food at a buffet. It feels like a very localized, almost cartoonish sin.
Yeah,
But the text describes it something much deeper and more insidious.
much deeper. The early fathers saw gluttony not just as a dietary issue, but as a profound material passion that visibly acts out through overindulgence, but its internal effects are catastrophic. It misuses our senses. It literally dulls the mind.
It's true.
Have you ever eaten a massive heavy meal and tried to do deep intellectual work right after? You can't. The biological reality mirrors the spiritual one. Gluttony paralyzes the soul's alertness. Furthermore, it even corrupts our relationship with our neighbors.
How does my overeating affect my neighbor?
Because gluttony fundamentally is an obsession with acquiring and consuming resources for one's own pleasure. Historically and spiritually, the fathers argued that taking more than you need inevitably leads to hoarding, which directly results in neglecting the poor. Your excess is someone else's deficit.
That is a challenging perspective. We have to look at the profound quote the text provides from St. Maximus the Confessor. He was a 7th century monk and one of the great theological minds. He observed, "It is not food that is evil, but gluttony. It is only the misuse of things that is evil, and such misuse occurs when the intellect fails to cultivate its natural powers."
It's a brilliant distinction.
I love this because it defends the physical world. Matter itself, food itself, is not bad. God created it. The physical world is good. The evil only arises in our misuse of it.
This is a crucial theological and philosophical anchor. The ascetics were not Gnostics. They didn't hate the physical body or physical matter. When we crave luxurious foods and delight purely in overindulging the body, we are surrendering our intellect's natural, God-given power of moderation to a base craving. We elevate the stomach to the role of a master.
So, to remedy this, we have to build up self denial and temperance. We have to retake the throne. The text highlights an incredibly simple but excruciatingly difficult rule from John Cassian, a 5th century monk who basically brought Eastern monasticism to the West.
This rule is tough.
It really is. His rule is this: stop eating while you are still hungry and do not continue until you are fully satisfied.
Just think about the discipline that requires.
It completely rewires your brain. You are taking the steering wheel back from your stomach in real time. You are proving to your nervous system that your mind, your intellect, is actually in charge of this vessel. You can survive not being 100% full.
It builds resilience.
St. John of the Ladder, who wrote a famous manual for monks in the 6th century, takes it a step further to go beyond mere abstinence regarding quantity. He advises eating Spartan dishes. That means eating foods that are not luxurious or overly appetizing. You eat for fuel, not for an explosive sensory experience.
And controlling gluttony is viewed as absolutely vital because, according to the fathers, it is the foundational gateway to other passions. If you cannot control the very basic impulse of what you put in your mouth, you have no hope of controlling more complex impulses.
Which opens the door to the next one.
This brings us to the next physical passion outlined in the text: lust or unchastity. The ascetics refer to lust directly as the child of gluttony. They assert that satiety in food, being completely full, heavy, and comfortable, is the father of fornication.
Wow.
When the body is consistently overnourished and relaxed, the excess physical energies invariably seek other outlets for gratification.
That is a fascinating connection. In modern society, we treat diet and sexuality as two completely separate categories of human behavior. But biologically and psychologically, connecting the two makes total sense. And it all traces back to the thoughts.
Always back to the thought.
Now, I want to push back on something in the text here. There's an insight from St. Hesychios where he says that most of us don't realize that all evil thoughts are merely images of material and worldly things. Wait, are all evil thoughts really just images? What about just a vague feeling of dread or abstract selfishness?
It's a great question. When St. Ezekiel speaks of images, he is touching on the visual and memory based nature of our temptations, particularly concerning the physical passions like unchastity. While abstract dread exists, when we are actively tempted toward a passion, we are rarely tempted by an abstract philosophical concept. We are tempted by specific images or sensory memories.
Right, mental pictures.
These images are drawn from our past interactions with the material world and projected onto the theater of our minds. His insight is that if we recognize these thoughts are not part of our soul, but just worldly images trying to hijack our attention,
Hmm.
we can strip them of their perceived power. We can use watchful prayer to continuously clear the mental screen, ridding our minds of these intrusive pictures before they kindle a physical reaction in the body.
Ah, I see. It's about recognizing the bait for what it is. To combat this incredibly powerful passion, the text outlines a two-step remedy. The first step is subduing the body itself.
Right.
This involves keeping proper fasts, doing vigils, which means intentionally staying up to pray when you'd rather be sleeping, maybe even sleep deprivation or sleeping on the floor. It is about performing bodily hardships so the flesh isn't constantly pampered and demanding comfort.
But the second step is internal.
Attaining a purity of heart. And you get that through watchfulness. Using that unceasing Jesus prayer to destroy the evil movements in the soul, and having the profound humility to realize you cannot do this alone. You need God's grace to carry out these supernatural feats of self control.
It is a necessary tandem effort. Bodily asceticism without purity of heart is just an extreme diet or an exercise in willpower. Purity of heart without bodily asceticism ignores the reality of our physical nature and the fact that our bodies and souls are deeply intertwined. They must work together.
And this perfectly transitions us to the final physical passion discussed, avarice, or the love of money and material wealth.
Another one heavily influenced by our culture.
Now, avarice is another one that links right back to the root passion. It's funny how interconnected these are. St. Nelis points out that avarice is deeply connected to gluttony. Why? Because the glutton needs money to buy all that luxurious food and satisfy an ever-present desire that can never actually be satisfied.
It's a never-ending treadmill.
You want more pleasure, so you need more money, which makes you want more pleasure, which requires a promotion, which takes more of your time.
It is the ancient blueprint for modern hustle culture. The pursuit of wealth becomes an end unto itself, disguised as a necessary means to secure comfort. To cure this endless craving, St. Nelos prescribes a very challenging two-part treatment.
Let's hear it.
The first step is voluntary poverty and liberality. Liberality meaning extreme generosity. You actively give away the thing you are hoarding. You purposefully break the physical attachment to your money or possessions by giving them to those in need. But the second step is where the true, lasting healing happens. You have to replace the love of material goods with the love of spiritual treasures.
Because you can't just leave a void.
You can't just empty your cup. A vacuum will always fill itself back up. You have to fill it with something better.
And how do we fill it? The text says it comes down to curating what enters the soul. We do this through spiritual reading and contemplation. We literally have to limit what we allow into our minds and accumulate only those things that elevate our soul.
Which is difficult today.
Think about modern life. If you are struggling with avarice, maybe you need to stop doom scrolling through social media feeds of celebrities' mansions, expensive cars, and luxury vacations. Every one of those posts is a suggestion that turns into a thought of inadequacy. Limit that toxic input and replace it with ancient wisdom, scripture, or the writings of these ascetic fathers.
Precisely. You starve the passion of its fuel while simultaneously nourishing the intellect. Now, the text notes an interesting psychological pivot here. Avarice is closely connected to anger and irritability. When you build your whole life around acquiring things or securing a certain level of comfort, and someone threatens that or deprives you of it, the immediate reaction is usually explosive.
Which brings us naturally from the physical battleground to the emotional one.
Yes.
Let's dive into the emotional passions, starting with anger. I think this is one of the most misunderstood emotions we experience. We tend to think all anger is inherently toxic and bad, but the text explains that anger actually has a natural purpose in our original design.
It wasn't put there by accident.
Right. We were given the capacity for anger to ward off evil, to defend the defenseless, and to help achieve our spiritual salvation by aggressively fighting our own temptations. It's supposed to be our spiritual immune system. It only becomes a passion, a sickness, when fallen man misdirects it.
That misdirection is the key to understanding the sickness. Anger is an intensive power. It goes against its natural purpose when we aim it at our neighbor, or, as the text acutely points out, when our love of pleasure causes us to lash out because our hedonistic habits are abruptly interrupted.
Oh, like we talked about earlier.
Think back to the diagnostic question about feeling irritated when a passion can't be fulfilled.
Yeah.
That irritation is misplaced anger. You aren't mad at an actual objective injustice. You are mad that your idol of comfort was temporarily removed. You're throwing an adult tantrum.
So, how do we fix our spiritual immune system? How do we recalibrate it so it attacks the disease and not our friends and family? The first remedy is directing our hatred only towards sinful behavior, not toward the sinner. And specifically, we need to know our own sins and begin to direct our anger toward them. We should be furious at the passions that are enslaving us, not at the person who cut us off in traffic.
Exactly the correct target.
The second indispensable aid the text mentions is obedience.
St. Isaiah's quote on this is profound. He writes, "He who wishes to acquire the anger that is in accordance with nature must uproot all self-will until he establishes within himself the state natural to the intellect." Uprooting all self-will. In a culture that worships autonomy, that is a terrifying phrase.
It really is.
But when we place ourselves under obedience, whether to a spiritual guide, to the teachings of the church, or even subordinating our preferences to the needs of our spouse or family, we are actively breaking our own stubborn self-will. It is our self-will that usually generates unrighteous anger. When we stop demanding that the universe bend to our preferences, our irritability dissolves.
So, what does this all mean when the fire of anger burns out completely, but in a bad way? When you just feel empty? That brings us to acedia. The text calls acedia a child of anger, which initially sounds counterintuitive.
It does.
Acedia is characterized by a feeling of disparagement, a total deadness to activity, and a complete lack of interest in future blessings. It's not quite sadness, it's more like a spiritual apathy. A deep, heavy, paralyzing whatever. It sounds a lot like what we call modern burnout. And the text says the causes include a lack of work, idle talking, and not spending time in spiritual reading.
The CD is particularly insidious in our modern, comfort-driven age. It is the spiritual equivalent of a suffocating heavy blanket. The Father's remedies for this are incredibly practical and, frankly, surprising.
I found them surprising too.
They don't prescribe deep philosophical reflection or trying to think your way out of it. The first step and best remedy is manual labor. Get up, use your hands, and do something physical and productive. Action breaks the spell of apathy. It's almost a form of somatic therapy.
I love that so much, feeling spiritually dead. Don't sit on the couch and ruminate. Go chop wood, go clean your kitchen, go pull weeds in the garden. Do works of diligence. Engage your physical body to jumpstart your spiritual heart.
Yes, move the body.
The other remedy for acedia is the remembrance of death.
Yeah.
That sounds so incredibly morbid to modern ears, but the idea is to stop putting off repentance for tomorrow. Remembering that our time on earth is finite acts as a jarring wake-up call to snap us out of our apathetic stupor.
It provides clarity.
It forces us to ask, if my time is limited, is this paralyzed, scrolling on my phone state how I want to spend the precious hours I have left?
It creates an immediate sense of ultimate priority. Now, closely related to acedia is despondency, but the Fathers are careful to distinguish them. Despondency is an insufficient zeal for spiritual work and a lack of perseverance. Often it hits us when we can't fulfill our desires for pleasure, or, and this is a critical point from the text, it assails us after we have fallen from a high spiritual level into a major sin, like unchastity or explosive rage.
The fallout.
The crushing guilt, self-loathing, and hopelessness that follows a major failure is despondency.
It's that awful feeling of, well, I messed up again, I broke my fast, I lost my temper, so what's the point? I'm a hypocrite, I might as well just give up entirely. It's a guilt spiral. To combat this overwhelming gloom, the first cure is simply prayer. Evagrios, who was essentially a pioneer of desert psychology in the 4th century, calls prayer the specific remedy for gloom and despondency.
Just talking to God breaks the isolation of the guilt.
St. John Cassian also suggests fellowship seeking out the company of good fellow Orthodox Christians. When you feel despondent, your instinct is to hide, the fathers say. Don't isolate yourself. You need community to remind you of God's grace.
And we must look at the brilliant remedy provided by St. John Climacus. He summarizes the truth beautifully. It is impossible for us who have fallen into the pit of iniquities ever to be drawn out of it unless we sink into the abyss of the humility of the repentant.
Look at that imagery.
You don't climb your way out of the pit of sin using your own pride or willpower. You actually have to sink lower into the abyss of humility. You accept your brokenness, you drop the illusion that you are perfect, you trust entirely in God's mercy, and ironically, that absolute surrender is what draws you out.
That is a staggering paradox. You rise by sinking into humility, you win by surrendering. And that perfectly sets the stage for our final category, the spiritual passions. If you thought the physical and emotional ones were tough, these are the sneakiest, most dangerous traps of all.
They really are.
Let's look at vainglory. I marvel at how insidious this passion is. Vainglory is literally the trap of doing good. It is characterized by forgetting that God is the source of all good, and instead we start ascribing all of our accomplishments to ourselves. We do something noble and immediately pat ourselves on the back and hope someone noticed.
It is the corruption of virtue itself. The text points out that this terrible passion can be awakened by almost any occurrence, but it especially afflicts us right after we do something good. The psychological warfare described here is stunning. The demons will sometimes allow us to easily prevail over one sin. They will literally let us win a spiritual battle, just so we become elated at the victory, puff out our chests, and immediately fall into vainglory.
They gladly surrender a pawn to capture your queen.
Precisely.
That is terrifying. You think you are making major spiritual progress because you successfully fasted for a week, or you held your tongue in an argument with your boss, and boom, you are immediately infected with toxic self-esteem and pride. You start looking down on everyone else who isn't fasting as strictly as you.
It turns virtue into a weapon.
I remember a time I made a decent donation to a charity, and I caught myself wanting to leave the receipt out on my kitchen counter just in case my friends came over so they might happen to see it. That's vainglory. Doing a good deed just to buy social capital. So how do we fight an enemy that uses our own victories against us?
The first remedy from the Fathers is confession. St. John Cassian says that by revealing our thoughts of vainglory to a confessor, we obtain a swift victory. He says the revealed thoughts literally wither and die when they are exposed to the light. Secrecy is the natural habitat of vainglory.
It thrives in the dark.
It thrives in the echo chamber of our own minds, where we can endlessly congratulate ourselves. By verbalizing it to another human being, to a confessor, you shatter the illusion. The ego hates being exposed as petty.
And this raises an important question. What do we do in the heat of the moment when the temptation to show off strikes? The text highlights a brilliant tactical maneuver from St. Diodochos, a 5th century ascetic. Oh, this is easily one of the most fascinating parts of the whole text.
It's so clever.
St. Diodochos says that when we are fiercely attacked by thoughts of self-esteem, say, because someone is visiting our home and we want to look super spiritual and disciplined in front of them, it is actually good to relax our normal regime to a certain extent.
Yes.
If you normally keep a very strict fast, but a guest comes over and you feel the urge to show off your fasting discipline to them, you should just eat the normal food they are eating. You intentionally break your own ascetic rule to frustrate the demon and drive him out. You choose humility over the appearance of discipline.
It is a master class in spiritual judo. You use the momentum of the attack against the attacker. You willingly embrace a small failure in your external physical discipline to protect the internal spiritual fortress of your humility. The Fathers understood that fasting without humility is just the diet of demons, because demons don't eat anyway, and they are incredibly proud.
Which brings us to the final, ultimate boss of all the passions, pride.
The big one.
The text draws a great distinction between the two. It says that, as a child is to a man, vainglory is to pride. Self-esteem and vainglory are the short-term, momentary falls. You brag about an accomplishment, you leave the receipt on the counter, you feel a surge of ego. But pride is different. Pride is the continual, unrepentant perseverance in these sins. It is a solidified state of being where you genuinely believe you do not need God and you are the master of your own universe.
And St. Diodochus gives a chilling explanation for one of its causes. Pride can actually be caused by God's withdrawal from us.
That's sobering.
When a soul becomes so stubbornly self-reliant, So convinced of its own majesty, God may step back, allowing the person to experience the full, terrifying weight of their own supposed independence. They are left to their own devices, which inevitably leads to ruin. It is a severe mercy meant to show us our absolute frailty without grace. Most of the previous treatments we've discussed, confession, obedience, watchfulness, help in defeating pride. But the ultimate cure is singular.
The surest path to uprooting pride is attaining true humility. And how do we obtain that? We can't just manufacture it. The text says it is greatly aided by the joyful acceptance of the hardships that God sends us.
Which goes against all our instincts.
St. Isaac of Syria says, God permits warfare to besiege us that we may learn humility. Think about that. Every struggle, every flat tire on the way to work, every difficult person we encounter, every physical ailment, it is all permitted warfare designed to break our pride and teach us that we are not the ones in control.
If we can joyfully accept these hardships as bitter but necessary medicine, rather than resent them as unfair curses, the truly humble soul defeats pride. Because pride simply cannot exist in a heart that gratefully accepts its own lowliness and dependence on God.
Wow. If we pull all of this together, what a profound journey we've just been on. We have traversed 2,000 years of the most intense, sophisticated psychology. It makes modern self help books look incredibly shallow by comparison.
To synthesize this incredible source material, we have learned that the mind is the true battlefield. The sickness plaguing humanity is not just a list of broken legal rules, but a series of interconnected passions, suggestions that become impulses that enslave our will, and the ancient, time-tested cure is watchfulness at the gates of our mind, a holistic asceticism to reorder our physical and emotional states, and ultimately an abyss of humility.
It all comes back to taking control of your reality. It's about breaking out of the impulse driven, endlessly distracted, pleasure seeking society we live in and reclaiming the beautiful, natural, God given state you were actually created for. Once again, we want to dedicate this deep dive to you, our listeners in the Philippines.
Yes, thank you for listening.
We are so incredibly grateful to Christ the Savior in Tagaytay City for presenting this exploration of spiritual health and ancient wisdom for the people of the Philippines. It has been a profound honor to unpack this for you.
Before we go, I want to leave you with the very final sentence from the source document. It is a haunting quote that actually cuts off mid-revelation. It reads, I saw the snares of the evil one spread over all the earth, and I groaned, saying, who can escape such snares? And I heard a voice saying to me.
And the text just leaves us hanging right there. It leaves us waiting on that voice's answer. So as you go about your day today, I want to leave you with this final thought to mull over. Based on absolutely everything we've unpacked today, from the subtle traps of vainglory to the battleground of the mind to the abyss of repentance, what do you think that voice said is the key to escaping the snares? The answer might just be the one specific virtue you are most resistant to practicing today. Think about it.